Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I am your host, Mike Brennan. You can connect with me over my website, which is mikebrennan.me. And I would love to introduce you to all the resources that I have over there created with you in mind, because I know what it's like to struggle in your creativity, whether it's trying to find your voice or your style, whether it's trying to be consistent with your creativity, because there are long phases where you don't touch anything, you don't do anything. And then you wait for an afternoon, a weekend or something, and those things never seem to come. I know what it's like to struggle with prioritizing for your creativity amongst many things that are vying for your attention, and always treating yourself like you get the crumbs, the last of things. When everything else is done, then I'll go and do my creative activities and endeavors. And so if that's you, I have created resources for you with you in mind, because I believe that when you create, we all win. You win because you're showing up the best version of yourself, and everyone else around you wins because we are the recipients of what it is that you're creating and putting out into this world. And so I have created things like the Daily Creative Habit Journal, which is a 90-day guide that is self-guided. You check in with yourself, set intention in the morning, come back at night and say, did I do what I said I was going to do? It's a way to track and measure what you're saying that you want to do in terms of your creativity. I also have my email list, which goes out every Monday. It is free. I share some insights there and some encouragement, along with specific prompts, daily prompts. So if you're looking to engage with your creativity, maybe you're coming back to it after being away for a long time, and you're just not sure, you need kind of a place to grab a hold. You want to try something, you need someone to tell you what to do, because not knowing is too open-ended. I give you specific prompts to try, and it's across mediums. Something might be music related, something might be visual art related, something may be written word, etc. And you can take these things and try them and see how you feel doing these things. Or if you need these things to be prompts to get you thinking differently about something that's become very routine and perhaps a little boring and stale, you can use it for that as well. You can go to dailycreativehabit.com. I have those resources available there for you. Again, a lot of them for free. There's a free Facebook group as well where you can join and participate, ask questions, and share some work, and be with some people who are looking to show up more consistently for their creativity as well. Now, on today's podcast, I, again, have a special guest because it's a local friend of mine here. So if you've been tracking along with some of these episodes, I have been sharing some of my new friends here in the Nashville area. And I've been excited to get out to certain events and meet people, meet fellow creative people, get to know what they're doing, and have conversations that are deeper and life-giving. And today I get to talk with my friend, Frank Ewert. And Frank is someone that I met, and we talk about this briefly, but we met at a concert, a Sixpence None the Richer concert. He and his wife were pressed up against the stage at this small venue, and I was there as well, and just because I really enjoy their music. And we struck up a conversation, and it turned into, hey, let's get coffee. And we've done that several times, and we've been there for each other, just continuing to learn, to get to know each other, what we do, and supporting each other creatively and just in life, and being someone who is engaged with the creative process. So you'll hear from this creative chat that Frank is someone who's very articulate, very heartfelt and thoughtful, and is able to talk about a lot of the deeper experiences and thoughts around writing and creating and the deeper work that goes on, not just what it is that we produce, but why we produce it and what sometimes gets in our way. And Frank has created a workbook to help with writer's block called Embrace Your Writer's Block. So we talk about that, where that came from, and how that can be a help to you if you're someone who struggles with these blocks. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with my friend, Frank Ewert. Frank, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike. Glad to be here.
Yes, and for the listeners, you are another local friend here of mine, creative friend who, just for context for people listening, we met at a Sixpence None the Richer concert you and your wife were pressed up against the stage in the front, and so was I. And we just started talking and hit it off. And I'm so thankful for moments like that where, you just don't know who's around you. And if you engage and you have conversation, it can certainly lead to other things. And so I'm thankful that normally we're doing this across the table from each other in person. And so today we get to do this with other people kind of eavesdropping on our conversation, if you will.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. Been looking forward to this, and it's fun to share each other's spaces. Like you say, normally we're at a coffee shop where we're out, and here you've got a little taste of where I live,
Yes.
and vice versa.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. So, for people who don't know you, you are a writer, you're an author, you are a wordsmith, and also you love editing and you all the things to do with words. And so today I would love to just kind of unpack a little bit of like where did that come from for you in the context of your journey and what you do today with that. And so to begin with, let's dial things back to like when was the first time you remember written word being something that was attractive to you in terms of this is how I want to express myself?
It probably goes back to the first time, probably goes back to grade school.
Mm-hmm.
I was homeschooled, and my mom had this writing curriculum. I can't remember what it was, but we were just starting it, first start of the year, just diving into a new textbook. Excuse me. And the exercise was a sheet of paper, 3 boxes on one side, and then 3 sets of lines for each box on the other. And the goal was to basically tell a story in 3 scenes, or maybe it was just to capture 3 scenes. I can't remember. And so one of them, I must have had winter in mind, or maybe it was winter. So maybe it wasn't the start of the year, but whatever it was, it's a picture of a winter's sun and an ant underneath it. I have no idea where that inspiration came from, but that doesn't matter. What matters is I wrote a sentence to describe it, or maybe it was a few sentences. I remember the first one, and it was the sun shone dully. And, for me thinking it was, okay, winter sun isn't warm. It kind of is glary. When you see it, it doesn't excite you. Like, I guess I was capturing more the feeling in your heart of the winter sun doesn't really warm you as much as you'd like, at least, in British Columbia where I was living, that's how it felt. So I turned it in, was really proud. And my mom said, you can't write that. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, it's impossible for the sun to shine dully. And I just dug my heels in. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, I can see this. I can feel this. This is okay. And she's like, no, that's actually just not possible. Like, you can't have a shine that's dull. And so we went back and forth. She was mom. She was a teacher. So she won. I had to correct it so that she would sign off on the page. And then later when she wasn't looking, I erased it and re-put the sentence I had started with because I was like, this is right. So I think that's the first time I started to kind of own the fact that I like words. I like sentences a lot. And that's when I obviously at that moment didn't foresee a career of getting into words, but there was something in that stuck around.
Yeah. That's funny. So I would guess that that's probably also where your love for editing came in, right? Because
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think, so if you fast forward, I don't know how many years, 7, 8 years to high school, I stumbled across Annie Dillard's The Writing Life in a library. And that's when I discovered, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. I haven't always known exactly what role that plays in my life. I didn't quite know then. I picked it up, oddly enough, that there was a Sixpence None the Richer connection there because I opened up the dust jacket, had never heard of this lady before, and I see that she's written a book called Tickets for a Prayer Wheel. And I'm like, oh, that's the name of an EP by Sixpence. I wonder if there's a connection. Turned out later, yes, there was. Matt Slocum had been reading Annie Dillard at some point. And, anyhow, so I picked up, got into it, and she has a little story she tells in there. A lot of people have told it. I won't break it down blow by blow, but the essence, a student accosts the professor and says, okay, if I want to become a writer, what do I have to do? And the guy goes, well, do you like sentences? And the student in the story is like, I'm a 20 something. You're like, why are you asking me if I like sentences? Right. But I immediately am like, yes, I do. I love sentences. And so I think for me, the editing comes not so much, it's not because I like correcting other people's work, although I do. Sometimes I get a perverse pleasure out of it. but it's because I love a good sentence. And so when somebody comes to me with a sentence that, or a paragraph or a chapter, a book, whatever the length is, that I think can be strengthened, it's like, okay, where else can this go? And I think that's the love of it. It is playing with words and feeling the sound of the music. I think that's probably more where my editing bent comes from, just that joy in messing. You'll appreciate this. The story Dillard tells there as well is of Michelangelo, who she says rumor has it got into painting because he loved the smell of paint. And that's kind of she's basically saying for writers that you have to feel that way about your material. If you don't actually like words or sentences, you probably don't want to be a writer. You probably want to be something else.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Because you're going to be doing it all the time. And so you need to be in love with the materials, the process, not just the end result of what it is that you imagine to be the thing. That's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is how if you're only enticed by the end result, you can lose so much of the joy in the process
Mm.
and so much of the learning in the process. Plus, sometimes the end result isn't what we imagine it to be. And so if we defer our happiness towards when that thing happens, when I get to see this thing or realize this thing, that's when I'll be happy about this because I'll know that I did a good job and I did what I saw in my head or what I heard in my head. It came out and it's on the page or wherever it is. And yes, that's a success, so to speak. And yet there are so many times when that doesn't happen. And that doesn't mean that the process was wasted. It may just mean that the process was teaching us something else to apply later for another project, right? Or to adopt as part of the way we work. Have you seen in your growth as a writer, like evolution in terms of like how you approach things or why you approach things?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, so I went from, in high school, I discovered Annie Dillard, like I said, and like that's who I wanted to be. Right. So I spent a few years trying to write like Annie Dillard. Newsflash, I'm not Annie Dillard, So that kind of got really helpfully redirected in college. I went to a small Christian college, and they let us do kind of for our final capstone project, which at that point was a thesis, let me write a collection of short stories. Got to be creative with it and learned how to tell stories really. Studying under my advisor, Doug Jones, who I don't think is in academia anymore, but he really schooled me in the school of Robert McKee. A lot of people will know who he is. He wrote some famous books on story that have heavily influenced a lot of screenwriters and other writers. And so that obviously shifted my perspective. Then I moved back to Vancouver where I'd grown up, and I didn't really write anything creatively for 12 years. So I had this huge gap. I was working on a master's at the time, so that was part of the reason for it. I'd been married by that point. When you started having kids, that was part of the reason for it. I was starting a new career at that point. I was working as a project manager. So there's all these kind of legitimate reasons, but underlying it all was this anxiety that was really showing up around my writing and other things, but just kind of really attacking my writing. So yeah, so I had, I've really gotten back into writing the last 5 years, and it's been a journey to kind of recover some of what I did before, but then also realize a little, like I said, I'm not Annie Dillard. I'm much more kind of rough around the edges, not so much in necessarily the words that I use, but just my style is a lot plainer. I'm not as kind of elevated or lofty as Dillard can be, but discovering how like owning my voice that way is really powerful. So I write far better. I write far more clearly. I have people like my stuff way more when I'm not trying to be Annie Dillard, when I'm just trying to be Frank.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. When you think back to that 12-year period where you didn't show up for yourself in writing, if you could go back and revisit yourself at that point, what would you say to yourself?
Oh, man, yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's a lot like what you said about, when we create something and the end result doesn't meet our expectations, we're still thankful for the process because we learned something there. So I look back at that and say, okay, I wish in some ways that I've been writing that I hadn't taken this break, and yet all the other things that I was doing were really powerful. So there's an element of where I wouldn't necessarily go back and change anything, but I think I feel some sadness at the ways that I shut down my creativity out of fear, really. So, I think if I were to say one thing to myself, I'd be like, it's okay. Don't be afraid. There's a whole lot that goes into that. I think spiritually, I wasn't in a place to let go of that fear. Emotionally, mentally, I wasn't. Like, there's so many things needed to happen. So, if I were to think of somebody else that I would bump into with it, and I probably would just try and hold some space and curiosity, things I wasn't doing for myself then. So I got to a point where I was like, we all know, or we've heard of those person, they played high school quarterback in high school, and that was kind of their moment.
Yeah.
And it's all been downhill since there. I kind of felt that way about writing. Like, I even had a book published before I moved back to Vancouver of short stories about hockey. It was a fun little book.
That's a very Canadian thing.
It is. It is. I embrace it.
On brand.
I still write about hockey. That's my current book project. There's another book about hockey. But it was like that song I did once, and now I've grown up and matured. And so what I had to be curious about is, rather than just write it off and move on, really trying to avoid things, to kind of sit with it. And so I think if I were to go back to myself, I'd want to just sit with myself and hold space and encourage myself to start holding space for the things that matter to me, instead of shutting them down because that's what I think other people want me to do, or that's what you're supposed to do. All the kind of lies that we imbibe that get in the way of, a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. That totally makes sense. And you and I have that similar piece of our journey where, I stepped away for 10 years and didn't do anything. And like you, I think there's stuff that happens to you that informs you, that shapes you, that makes you who you are today. So that's why you wouldn't want to go back and take anything away. And yet at the same time, there is a lot of sadness and pain. And, I think if I had to answer that question for myself, I would say that I would want to make sure that that version of myself would have better understood the importance of creativity in my life, like the place that it should have, and that it wasn't simply about career.
Mm.
And it also wasn't just about identity, but that there's a piece in there that is also self-care and exploration and self-expression. And when you throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater, there's a lot of things you end up losing that are, victims of the mentality of just, well, I just can't do this now, or this isn't the season of life, or whatever the reasons that you tell yourself are. It's interesting to me that you wrote a book, and
Can I ask a question about what you were just saying?
Yeah.
I know you're supposed to be the one asking questions.
No, that's fine. We'll have the conversation. Yeah.
You've triggered something for me here. So, would that version of you, was he comfortable sitting with himself and looking at himself and exploring himself the way you just described? You wish he could have done through creativity, or seeing how creativity fed that?
I would say certain moments, yes, but overall, probably no. And that's the bigger thing for me, that when I stepped away and then ended up suffering depression, and depression led me to, how do I make sense of all this again? That was the catalyst for me to come back to my creativity. When I came back, there were no rules anymore. There were no supposed to's, have to's. It was a lot of asking questions. And I wouldn't have said it at this time, but it was really curiosity. And saying, what do I want this to look like? What can this look like? I don't even know what I want to do. I don't have a clear picture on where I'm going. I just know I need to go someplace, because where I've been doesn't work anymore. And it was going on that journey that wasn't just about creativity in the end. It was really more about rediscovery and discovery of myself in the process. And creativity was the vehicle at that point. And of course, the more you do things on a skill level, the better you become. The more you do work, the more your voice and your style emerges. So all that stuff was happening, but really underneath that, there was a deeper layer of I'm getting to know myself in a way that I never knew myself before. And I didn't know that that was the case. And so I think that process helped creativity transcend to a different level for me, where it wasn't just a job or something with my career, and it wasn't just an identity thing of I'm an artist, or I'm a designer, or I'm a whatever. It was more of no, this is like a way of life. And I want this to touch whatever it is that I do.
Mm.
So it's okay if it's visual art. It's okay if it's spoken word. It's okay if it's written word. It's whatever. It's okay if I'm hanging out at a coffee shop right with you, having a conversation. Like I want creativity to just come out naturally in all those things. And so
Mm.
it was this is much bigger than I've ever thought about this before. This is a life encompassing thing, not just a career or a hobby or self expression tool, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, because it feels like when you call something a career or a hobby, it's like you're distancing yourself from it,
Yes.
right? That's why we call our things careers, because it's like we don't want our identity to be bound up just in our career.
Right.
But what you're describing is really, it is self-expression and showing up. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate you willing to
Yeah.
answer
Yeah.
my
No
question,
worries.
because
Yeah.
that's something I've been mulling over lately, and was curious
Yeah.
if I had like-minded people, and the answer is yes.
Yeah. Bringing up the word hobby, did you ever think about, or was anyone else imposing that word on you in terms of your craft? Like, oh, that's a nice hobby to write, or that's a nice hobby to, but like the real work is over there, or the responsible thing to do is over there, whatever.
100%. I won't say that anybody else told me to think like that or talk to me that way. That's certainly how I thought of it. And that's how I tried to approach it too. So, part of my story is my writer's block really seized me while I was in my master's program. Towards the end, I'm writing, I chose not to write a thesis, but just like a long paper and take some extra classes instead. It's supposed to be a 40-page paper. And I got to write about W.H. Auden, who is like still my muse, the guy that I come back to when I need to kind of have some fresh air. I just still love his poetry and his prose both. So, it's like a dream project. I get to just read and write about this guy that I love, and whose writing I could read for hours and never get tired of it. And I couldn't write the damn paper. I just, I got started. I liked my intro, got a few pages in, and partly, academic papers aren't super exciting. And so I already knew that professors tended to like my papers because they were fun to read. Like they didn't have a lot of grading, they didn't need a lot of red ink, and I'm an engaging writer. I didn't lose that when I wrote academic papers, but I kept seizing up. And I think by the time it was done, it took me 4 or 5 years to finally finish a 40-page paper. And that, there were breaks. Like it was like I was working full time while doing school. So like there was, but I would take 2 weeks off and be like, I'm finally getting it done, and not get it done. Right. And just the shame that came on that, of like, I can't, like, I started avoiding conversations. My wife would avoid conversations because she's like, I'm tired of telling people like, you're not getting this done. What's wrong with you? Right. And I'm like, I know, I don't know. I feel the same way. So when I finally got it done, it was such a load off. And I thought, okay, finally now I can write again. And so I thought, I want to learn how to write poetry. And so I bought all these poetry books, but I approached it as a hobby. Like, oh, this is something fun I can do in addition to everything else. And then work and everything else took over, and the same kind of paralysis came back. So is that just because I approached it as a hobby? No, there was other stuff going on, right? I wasn't willing to sit with myself, which was the real problem with all of the writing and writer's block and creativity. But I was trying to give myself an excuse. I think that's really what it comes down to. I wanted to give myself the excuse of, if I just call this a hobby, I'll have permission to do it, and that
Mm.
just wasn't in the cards for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That word hobby, sometimes, like for me, I have a knee jerk reaction to that, because that was the word that was used to, like, my dad was very practical minded, and obviously loved me, wanted to see me do well, and so was trying to help steer me in a direction that's like, okay, do the responsible thing, the practical thing. You need the health insurance, you need the money, you need the, all the things and whatever. And I didn't know it at the time to say enough to go like, well, I'm not wired the same, and I may not value the same things, and I'm not motivated by the same things. And so I couldn't necessarily articulate that. And so what ended up happening is he'd be like, well, just, it's fine to have a lot of hobbies and things. He's just kind of like doing whatever. It's just, it's like almost like a dismissive type of thing. And so there's still that like remnant whenever I hear that word hobby, other than Hobby Lobby, which if you want to sponsor this podcast, please call me. But that word, it just, there's that connotation to it for me that makes it feel lesser than, makes it feel like it's somehow taking something that you're very passionate about and being dismissive of it. And so I don't know that I've ever really had that conversation with anyone else. I've written something on that once, but being that that kind of just came up in this, I figured I'd poke around in that and see what your experience is. It's interesting.
Very
One
similar
of
to
the
yours.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the other things that you said in the context of your answer, you talked about being blocked, and I know you have your new workbook, and it's embrace your writer's block. I'll hold it up right here, and it is a resource for people who are feeling blocked, who feel like they need to find their way through this block. And I'm confident that this has come from your own experiences and your wrestlings, and you saying, I want to take what I've learned and apply it to someone else. What is your biggest motivation in, first off, addressing this, and then actually creating this workbook for someone to be able to work through this process?
Well, the honest answer,
Mm-hmm.
we'll just get the ugly honest answer out of the way first.
Okay.
I wrote this as a lead magnet initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was working with a business coach. He's like, you need a lead magnet for your mailing list. I'm like, okay. But I didn't want to just make another, you know, however long ebook to collect digital dust in people's downloads folders. So I've been reading a lot of, I've just been going through The Writer or The Artist's Way by
Mm-hmm.
Julia
Yeah.
Cameron.
Julia
I'm
Cameron.
like, I
Yeah.
love the interactive nature. And so I just was like, if I'm going to do this, it's got to be interactive. Like people actually have to do something with it. So that's how it started. So just because I feel like I have to be honest rather than give like this really high philosophical answer of this
Yeah.
is what I'm giving to the world. It was just like, hey, this need was there. What I've really come to love it, and why I chose to take it away from being just a lead magnet and turn it into a workbook that people can hold and write in themselves, is just because I think there's a lot of books about writing. I have a lot of them, and there's nothing wrong with any of them. Well, there's nothing wrong with the idea that most of them are really good. How will we say that? But reading a book about writing is not going to help set you free.
Mm. Wait, I want to just pause there for a minute. Say that again.
Reading a book about writing is not going to set you free. If you're having trouble writing, you have to write. And that's the whole premise behind this workbook, and why I've put it out and given it to people, is because like this is what I had to learn. And Julia Cameron's really great with this in The Artist's Way. She's like, do your morning pages. And the first time I heard of the morning pages, I was like, what are you talking about? There's no way I'm doing that. No. And partly it's my kind of, naturally rebellious nature to go, you tell me to do something, I just don't want to do it. But then I hit kind of one of those low moments, and that's when I really dug into the writer or artist way and started. And I was like, wow, this is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that practice of getting up and writing that I still do, every morning or most mornings. I miss it if I don't. It's this really important, really spiritually grounding time more than anything, I think. And so that was kind of the concept behind this, of just going, okay, and I know lots of people who deal with this, right? And I've, I had clients that I was working with that dealt with this. My famous example, I have a client who I started working with who had a memoir due, and she said to me, every time I sit down at my laptop, I open it up and I shut right again because I just I can't face it, right? I'm like, I know what that's like. I've been there. So a lot of the stuff I have in here is stuff that I've experienced, stuff that I've seen others experience. And it's really just going, okay, you know what? Take a breather, right? I've called it kind of 10 steps. There's 10 days of writing in there, which you can do in whatever, like if it's 10 days in a row or 10 days spread out, it doesn't really matter. I just want you to write. Like if you're feeling blocked, use a different example. I hurt my rotator cuff a few years back, and I didn't know what it was at first, and so I just kind of was holding my arm stiff. Kind of, I had a hoodie that my hand fit perfectly into. Kind of immobilized it. I'm like, okay, this will, right. And so I went to a physiotherapist. He's like, I understand why you did that. That's the worst thing you could do. You actually need to move it. That's not always going to feel good, but you need to move it so you can build up the muscle strength, get some blood flow, right? And for writers, it's the same way. We want to stay immobile, right? We want to read all the stuff and maybe hope that inspiration hits. We want to really, at the end of it, I think, is we want to wait for a time when fear or other big feelings aren't present. For me, it's usually fear. And for a lot of people, it's fear, but there might other be big feelings. There's another story from a writer's life. There's a writer Diller describes who would like write and get stuck and then go out and do errands and basically do errands until they forgot themselves, an idea struck, and they would race back and they would like madly type away until they realized they were writing again, seized up, and then go repeat the process, right? And it's just this race to outrun fear. And I'm going, that's not the right way. Like that's it might work, but what a horrible way to be creative. So instead of that, sit with it. That's why the whole thing is called embrace your writer's block. It's like, what if your writer's block is actually a friend? Right? That's not a thought most of us want to have.
Yeah.
But I think when we start to embrace that, to sit with that, to at least give that possibility a chance, then we can find some magic happening. And I've seen it happen with clients. I've seen it happen with people who've used earlier versions of this workbook where it's just, like there's something with that to look at writer's block as being a friend and actually a good sign that if we can reframe that, I think, and start to unlock some of the creativity there and help us not like find the freedom, but I think reclaim the freedom. I think that's often what needs to happen, is us to step into that and own it rather than wait for somebody to come along and give us permission, which is just not going to happen.
Yeah. 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 I love that you've created this, and certainly that you are a like-minded person that takes your own experiences and examines them and then creates something as a response that helps other people. I just think that that's a beautiful response to even our own lives, our own experiences. And, I've talked to you many times about this idea of redemption. And I think that certainly is at the heart of it. It is taking things that we wish we would never have gone through or wouldn't choose to have gone through, and yet going, how can this be something that is turned around and then introduces hope, introduces life and some passion and some help? And to be able to give somebody a tool, a resource, on top of saying, I see you, I understand, because I've experienced that. And so I'm not just simply prescribing something to you because that's what's popular, or because I'm trying to make money only, or because of whatever the reason, fill in blank. But underneath all that, it's sitting down with somebody, even if it's not physically sitting down with them, and saying, I get it. I've been there. I've found my way through. Here's a resource. That's a tremendous thing. So I applaud you for being able to put that in book format, to be able to outline that for people. And even if it started out as a lead magnet, I know we talk about that, but to be honest with you, I think sometimes that's what the seed of an idea is. Doesn't show up how it's going to be later on. It is that seed. It is that thing of going, well, this might be a thing or it might not be, but I'm not sure. Let's do a little something with it to kind of test, to validate, to just get things going. And then you might realize, oh, this is something actually bigger. This is something more important, or has a life that's coming after what the initial thought was. So even that's a great lesson in there,
Yeah. And for me, it was a lesson for me and how it came together, where this thing I thought I had to do, and I was like, okay, let me make it my own. How do I make this my own? Right. It's like, there's this structure, this sort of thing you're supposed to do for a lead magnet. And then hitting on, what, how I made it my own was I needed it to be interactive, right? So, it's a almost 100-page book now. A lot of those pages are blank pages for people to write in, and just be like, oh, that's a really cool idea. I like this. I think that's part of it is when we come across those ideas, and this is what I'm trying to do for myself as I go through whatever other projects, rather than pigeonhole and be like, well, this is what the format needs to be. It's like, how can I play with that? Even within the constraints of whatever I'm working on, how can I make it my own? What do I see in it that brings something different and fresh, that at the end of the day, it made me excited to work on it as opposed to a drudgery kind of thing. And I think that's made it also a better tool because people feel that energy that I brought to it. as opposed to the kind of the drudgery energy of, oh, I've got to do this, which I don't
Yeah.
think would have gotten in its way for sure.
Yeah. And I love the idea of taking something that's like the standard, way of doing things. There's a format that's the industry standard. You have to do this way, and going, okay, well, at one time that wasn't the industry standard. At one time that was an idea that was revolutionary, maybe. And so how can I deviate from that without going too far where people don't know what to do with something?
Mm.
And you want to make sure things are clear and that it's accessible for people, because I think of something I heard a long time ago in terms of creativity and people trying to have these great ideas, and they're like, oh, I'm like so enamored with this idea, this is amazing, oh, and they're just like, they're like foaming at the mouth because they're so excited about it, whatever, right? And then they start to make something around it, and it's like, it's clever, but it's not clear.
Mm.
And so it's great to be clever, but if you lose clarity in the process, then it becomes unaccessible for people. Then you lose people.
Mm-hmm.
And the very thing that you're trying to get to connect with people falls flat, or people misinterpret it because you've been too clever, and it
Mm-hmm.
misses the mark. And then it becomes like an inside joke.
Mm.
It's like, so, but all that to say, I think there is something about going, here's what's expected, here's what's the standard. How can I contextualize this first and foremost for myself, so that when I'm engaging with the process of creating this thing, it feels better for me and I can show up in a different way, like you said. And then maybe there's something there that other people can learn from too in the process, and going
Mm.
like, yeah, it's okay to deviate from this thing. It's okay to introduce a new element, because that might spark something and become the new industry standard or something. So you just never know. I think it's take the chance on yourself,
Mm.
and listen to yourself, know yourself enough, and don't ignore those promptings, I think.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind, I remember uh, one of our pastors talking about typology. And he would always say, typology is like when you've got repetition, but with a twist. You don't need a whole lot to make something your own, right? I think sometimes we think I've got to tear it all down and rebuild it. And it's usually just a little twist. And one of my favorite examples is Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette. You've seen that. It's a period film, but it's a period film with modern music. And that just changes the entire movie. It brings those characters and that story to life and makes it personal in a way that would not be possible if it were a typical period piece. And this is something Auden talked about once. He says, like, the problem with a period piece is you go there and you watch it and you leave. He's probably talking about plays or things at that time, because movies wouldn't have been quite as common. But all you're asking is, well, were the costumes authentic? But when you translate that, and he often did that in his poetry, he wrote a lot of poems, some long poems, which were retellings, often in modern vernacular. There's a Christmas story told in the 1940s kind of scene, postscript to The Tempest by Shakespeare, where Caliban, if those of you are familiar with the story, Caliban writes in the style of an elevated Henry James, right? He's messing with that, right? But when we do that, we no longer ask ourselves, are the costumes authentic? We actually have to come face to face with the real questions that a work is asking. And I think, again, it doesn't require a whole lot. It requires, like, what if Caliban was Henry James? Well, that's a weird thought. Let's just see where that goes, right? And you can be the judge if you think, Auden was successful with that. I just like the idea behind trying that of,
Mm-hmm.
Just change one thing. What does one change make? How does that make it your own? And how does that bring your audience more, really, I think, more face to face with themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. That it makes me think of Hamilton too. Same
Mm-hmm.
idea. It's taking something that's a period thing and then introducing music that is more modern. And I think that's probably why that resonated with so many people and became such a hit Broadway play. The other thing about that too is, like, I talk about that in terms of mashups.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of my favorite things to do. And I actually have a whole chapter in my book, Make Fun of Habit, about this, and this idea of taking two things that seem like they're not related at all and going, what would that look like to put these together? Or finding one thing that may have a common space with these two things that don't seem like they go together, and going, that's interesting. There's a pattern here. Or my brain's telling me there is a connection point here. It's not obvious, but what would happen if I put these two things together? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's that process of examining that and pushing into that and going, if I can take something that somebody's familiar with and just go, like you said, just a little bit off, it's the element of surprise and delight, because people are like, oh, I was expecting this, but you did that. I see what you did there. Okay. And that's like the good clever, right?
Yes.
People are going with you, and then you go, oh, but wait, we're going to step over here for a minute. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. Got it. I personally love stuff like that when I see that
Yeah,
out
me too.
and different places, because it tells me that someone was paying attention.
Yeah.
There's an extra level of thought that went into that. And it wasn't simply just grabbing low hanging fruit, but someone sat with that long enough to process it and think about patterns and connections and those ideas around those things, and then come up with something that was new as a result. And so that speaks volumes to me, and I appreciate that.
I think that's so crucial. Is you're giving the audience an either or, and then going, oh, actually, no, it's neither,
Yeah.
right? And if you do it well, and for writing, right, when I'm working on, I think it comes up more when I'm working on fiction, but even nonfiction, I think it's there where you can give them that kind of element. So, like in my first book of stories, I got a story which is a really bit of flash fiction about a breakaway. If you know hockey, breakaways when it's a player and a goalie, there's no one in between. So it's like this glorious scoring opportunity, right? And there's two possible outcomes there. You score a great goal, or you miss, or the goalie saves or doesn't go your way, right? Well, and I won't spoil the story for anyone who wants to read it, but I chose a different outcome, right? And it was really exciting for me because I'm like, wow, this is really fun, right? And it makes it work in a different way. But our readers really like that because they want to be surprised, right? Partly because when we do that in our art, we're giving them permission to look for surprise in their lives.
Yeah.
How much do we need that,
Yes.
right? How often do we go through our days going, well, these are the parameters. It can be either awesome or terrible, right? What if it's neither but is better than either option, right? I think that that's the gift we can give our readers, new glasses, as it were, to see the possibility for that surprise in the real world, because it does happen. Like you say, like people paying attention. If we're noticing, if we're paying attention, we'll get to see a lot of that surprise. And I think that's what
Yeah.
our art is really the gift we can give people is that ability to kind of pay attention again.
Yeah. Yeah. Two things that my brain just reminded me of in terms of paying attention and hockey. So I have a short little story. When I was in junior high, I think it was junior high anyway, there was opportunity to play hockey. We went in this high school gym, and so it wasn't ice hockey. It was just kind of gym hockey. I don't know what you call this. It's not field
Ball
hockey.
hockey.
Oh, okay. I remember I was not a sports guy. I'm still not a sports guy. I tried, but it never held my attention. And so I was there on the court or whatever. Apparently, I guess there's a circle at which you're not supposed to stand in or be in for more than 30 seconds or something. And the action was happening down and not close to me. And so I guess I was daydreaming, and I just was not noticing what was happening around me. And then I got in trouble for standing in the spot I wasn't supposed to stand in for more than whatever it was, the 15, 20 seconds, whatever it was. And then I think I may have actually done something to help the other team get a goal instead of my team. So that was kind of the end of my hockey experience. I was like, yeah, you know what? That's not good. That's not I wasn't engaged. I was daydreaming and thinking probably about I'm gonna go home and draw something later. I don't know what.
Do something. Do something.
Exactly. Oh man. Well, Frank, this has been amazing. As you know, I mean, we could talk all day, but we've kind of come to the top of our time for the podcast right now. But where can people go to find you? How can they get a hold of this workbook if they're interested? Lay some links and some places on us.
Yeah. So the workbook is available on Amazon. I'll just tell people, I don't care if you buy it on Amazon or from my website, but the one you get from my website's nicer, just because the Amazon is the print on demand and it's a little see-through in the pages, where the one that you can get on my website, you can order it straight from my distributor, Ingram, and it's just higher quality paper. So, but I don't care. Whatever you want, if it's helpful, get it on Amazon. That's fine. My website is Work with Words. So it's a website in progress. It's not very pretty right now. I'm kind of redesigning it and getting it to be kind of more of a writer's website. So there's some stuff on there, but you can subscribe to my newsletter. Some of the stuff I've talked about today is stuff that I talk about on a weekly basis. And on Fridays, on Saturdays now, Saturdays I send out some personal writing. Readers actually got to read the Breakaway story last week because I was sharing that. So if you like reading about writing and also, think you might enjoy things from K-dramas to Hellboy to Taylor Swift to hockey to Auden, it's all there on my Friday things, depending on where my mood takes me. So, but I have a lot of fun and love readers, so they're welcome to join me there, and they can sign up at workwithwords.co is the URL.
Awesome. Cool. And
Thanks
I
for
encourage
having me,
everybody.
Mike.
Yeah, I encourage everybody who's listening right now to be sure to subscribe to that, to follow Frank. Obviously, from our conversation today, wealth of not only information, inspiration, but a heart to want to help people as well. So
Thank you.
that is the golden trifecta. So
I'm glad to be in this space with someone who feels the same way. So thanks very much. It was a great conversation. Look forward to doing it again soon.
thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.